Well, the first thing we can do is throw out the title. Sometimes when you do these things, you start with one title, and that's the title I gave Phil. But then as you go along, you change it. So that's what's happened. So this one is called The Pharisees of Jesus. Okay. Notice I put the word Pharisees or the name Pharisees first before Jesus. Although this talk will touch on Jesus and the Pharisees, it is more about who the Pharisees were and how they related to Jesus and to others. In the Old Testament, the Pharisees played an integral role in the passing down of oral tradition from God. God gave all of his directions in speech. There were no papers that people could read from or look at. So so it was the Pharisees' job to make sure that the men of the church and the children in the synagogues, schools, could memorize everything in order to pass it down. There was no way to read it. The Pharisees emerged as a religious sect about 165 to 160 BC. So that would have been, somewhere, around 160 years before Christ was born. Because the Pharisees were a religious sect, they were the kind of natural pipeline for educating the Jewish men and the Jewish boys. Notice I don't say anything about women or girls, because there wasn't anything about women or girls. It was all the men and the boys. And so they studied God's law and any other religious matters, like learning prayers or the Torah. The Torah was and they had to memorize, I think it was the first 4 or 5 books of the Torah. Now, when I was a kid, I was fairly good at memorizing, but I didn't have to memorize like that. I could just memorize a few, a poem here or there, or some maybe memorize the times tables or something. But there wasn't any memorizing large pieces. Religiously, the study of the laws of God was what mattered the most. The Pharisees were the spiritual leaders, and so they passed on information, everything that had to be memorized first by the Pharisees. Then the Pharisees took it to the young people and the men, the young boys and the men, and made them memorize it as well. Now, I know you've done a lot of memory work. If you went to school, you had to. And what you did was you went over it and over it and over it till you had it memorized. And then you could then teach other people to memorize things. This was called the oral tradition. Just imagine going to school where there are no books and all you did all day was memorize. I don't know, how would you feel? I wouldn't. I know when I was a kid, I wouldn't want to do that very much. So you would spend all your time memorizing and repeating back all the material you needed to learn, and then they would have you do the next section and repeat it back. I'm so happy that I have the ability to read. Reading is time consuming, but memorization is really time consuming. In this Bible, see where those, well, let's do it this side, that thing, little flaps are. From here to here is the Old Testament. That's how much you would have had to memorize. There wasn't a New Testament yet. And the print in my Bible is fairly small. So there was a lot that you had to do. Not for me. I would want to do that at all. The Pharisees were also a political group. They used their influence to sway the government leaders of the day. And so they stirred up the common man to carry out their political agendas. Now, they pushed the cause of preserving Judaism. Judaism was only one of several um, religions, if that's what you want to call them, beliefs at that time. There were other groups like the Sadducees and the Essenes and the Zealots, but the Pharisees were the most influential men. And by the way, in the time of the Pharisees, they did not read or write, or at least in this time. They did eventually learn to record history, but they were still back in that oral tradition. As Jewish leaders, the Pharisees had certain characteristics of their beliefs that they wanted preserved. The belief in only one God, belief that God cannot be subdivided into different persons. They did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They did not accept Jesus as a divine being. They did not accept Jesus as an intermediary between humans and God. That was giving too much power to Jesus, and they did not want that. They believed Jesus was just a man who lived a life of faith in God. Now, what was Jesus's view of the Pharisees? He regularly condemned them and accused them of hypocrisy. I want to read again this passage of Matthew 23, 1 to 12. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers, and you do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to call instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I can see that I am going to be headed to the eye doctor because these glasses are not working. That print is very small in there. When Mary Magdalene was cleaning Jesus' feet with the expensive oil and her tears and her hair, Simon the Pharisee complained. He said that oil could have been used or sold and the money given to the poor. That wasn't what his concern was. His concern was that Jesus was taking away some of his thunder. He and the other Pharisees wanted their importance. They wanted to be adored by the people that were around. And He really wasn't that worried about what they were giving to Jesus. I mean, to uh, giving to Jesus. I think the problem, like I said, was they didn't want their thunder stolen. The Pharisees had always had the idolatry of the Jewish people. They were fighting hard because their respect and adoration was now being shifted to Jesus. Respect and adoration are different things, are difficult things to give up. And the Pharisees were digging their heels in all the way. Power affects different people in different ways. The Pharisees believed that God created the world, chose Israel as his chosen people, and rewarded or punished them according to his law. As believers in Jesus Christ, we believe that his grace is sufficient. With the power of Jesus, we can work through the differences of our world. We have lots of differences, ethnic differences, cultural differences, um, religious differences, and we can work through all of these with the power of God. Lord, bring peace to all. Go ahead.